A 33-year-old communist running an insurgent campaign beat a multi-million-dollar establishment machine politician in the New York Democratic mayoral primary. Now, I don't want to harp too much on a municipal election, but there were two interesting threads that I think came out of Mamdani's victory that I think are worth us understanding because they're reflective of where the broader American left is at this moment in time. The first is that it drives home just how much the voters in each of the respective parties have changed. If President Trump's victory in 2024 was rooted in a broad working and middle class coalition, Mamdani's coalition is almost the inverse of that. If you look at his electoral performance precinct by precinct, what you see is a left that is completely left behind the broad middle of the United States of America. This is a guy who won high-income and college-educated New Yorkers, and especially both young, highly educated New Yorkers, but he was weakest among black voters and weakest among those without a college degree. That's an interesting coalition. Maybe it works in the New York Democratic primary. I don't think it works particularly well in the United States at large. He did particularly well in the Bangladeshi areas of New York, but he did particularly poorly with non-Bangladeshi Asian immigrants, particularly Chinese Americans. And if you look at the precincts where he did the best, it was in New York's gentrifying neighborhoods, places like Ridgewood and Bushwick, places I haven't heard anything about, but I read about in a paper. His victory was the product of a lot of young people who live reasonably comfortable lives, but see that their elite degrees aren't really delivering what they expected. And so their own prospects with all the college debt may not in fact be greater than those of their parents. And I say that not to criticize them, because I think that we should care about all the people in our country, particularly those downwardly mobile, college-educated people who feel like the American dream is not quite all it's cracked up to be. But we have to be honest about where his coalition is. It is not the downtrodden. It is not poor Americans. It is not about dispossession. It's about elite disaffection and elite anger. The party of highly educated but downwardly mobile elites, they comprise a highly energetic activist base, but it's important because it's not just the elites, the college-educated New Yorkers. That base was supplemented by carefully selected ethnic blocs carved out of the electorate using identity politics as the knife. And that, by the way, I think explains Mamdani's bizarre appeals to foreign politics intended to signal to one particular group of New Yorkers or another. Let us ask ourselves, why is a mayoral candidate in our nation's biggest city whining about banning Bibi Netanyahu, a country whose population is about the same size as that of New York, and threatening to arrest a foreign leader if he tries to come to New York City? Why is a New York mayoral candidate attacking Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, as a war criminal? Why is he talking about globalizing the Intifada? In fact, what the hell does that even mean in Manhattan? But what might seem like a contradiction makes a little bit of sense if you peel back the onion. Consider a movement that rails against the billionaire class, despite the fact that the billionaire class remains firmly in the quarter of the modern left. A movement that idolizes foreign religions, even as it rejects the teachings of those faiths. It rails, this new modern left, against white people, even as many of its funders and its grassroots activists are privileged whites themselves. Now, I may not speak for many of you, but I was once comforted by these contradictions within the modern left. How could privileged whites march around with a straight face decrying white privilege? How could progressives pretend to love conservative Muslims despite those Muslims' views on gender and sexuality? But the answer is obvious if you think about it. And it's a very, very dangerous and very sad answer. The radicals of the far left, they don't need a unifying ideology of what they're for because they know very well what they're against. What unites Islamists, gender studies majors, socially liberal white urbanites, and big pharma lobbyists? It isn't the ideas of Thomas Jefferson or even of Karl Marx. It's hatred. They hate the people in this room. They hate the President of the United States. And most of all, they hate the people who voted for that President of the United States in the last election in November. This is the animating principle of the American far left. Now, to be clear, it isn't true of most of the people who vote for Democrats. Most of the people who vote for Democrats, they're good people struggling to get by, even if we think that they're misguided in their political judgment. But pay close attention to what the leadership of this movement says outside of the glossy campaign ads and outside of the general election tested messaging themes, and it's obvious what animates the leadership of the modern Democratic Party. The far left doesn't care that BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, led to a spike in violent crime in urban black neighborhoods, and it did, because that same movement also led to anarchy in middle-class white neighborhoods. They do not care that Islamism hates gays and subjugates women, because for now, it's a useful tool of death against Americans. And they don't care that too many pharma companies are getting rich from experimental hormonal therapies, because in the process, they're destroying the so-called gender binary that has structured social relations between the sexes for the whole of Western civilization. And they certainly don't care that deporting low-wage immigrants will raise the wages of the native-born, because they don't mean to create higher living standards for those who are born and raised here, whether they're black, white, or any other skin color. They mean to replace those people with people who will listen to their increasingly bizarre ethnic and religious appeals. They are arsonists, and they will make common cause with anyone willing to light the match. And that's why Mamdani himself is such an appealing instrument to the left. He captures so many of the movement's apparent contradictions in a single human being. A guy who describes the Palestinian cause as central to his identity, yet holds views like abortion on demand or using taxpayer-funded money to fund transgender surgeries for minors. These views, of course, are completely incomprehensible on the streets of Gaza. This guy represents that contradiction. How can you believe in the cause of the Intifada while also holding views that are completely anathema to those people? And the answer is because he's not building a positive program. He's not trying to build prosperity. He's trying to tear something down. And he's very effective at articulating all of the things that the far left hates in modern America. Now, Ryan and all of these incredible people asked me to speak on statesmanship. And I think one task of statesmanship is to recognize what the other side, what the far left wishes to do to America in 2025. But the most important part of statesmanship is to be for something. And I think that was what was so different about President Trump's campaign compared to the 30 years of failed GOP politicians during my lifetime. It wasn't just that he articulated what was bad. He wasn't just articulating how the left had gone off the rails. He was also offering a positive vision that people could get behind. And that's the second thread I want to touch on today. Because if the left wishes to destroy, we must create, not just over the next few years, but over the next generation. Now, the most obvious way to do that is to ensure that the people we serve have a better life in the country that their parents and grandparents built. And that's the thing that makes me most proud of what the administration has done over the last 6 months. Now, this is why the president cares so much about tariffs, a word